Thanks for coming, yeah, thank you to Rebecca and Audrey for setting up this thing so we can, I don't know, introduce people around Berlin who are doing stuff or have done things in the past that we can all meet and get together, and hopefully this will be more something that will continue on and we can help create a bit of a community together. So I'm just going to talk about my life and how amazing I am. So yeah, I guess to start with, the title. Crafting the precise amount of shitness. I'm not actually going to get to the point of why it's titled this tonight, because I'm not going to get into circuit design. I will allude to it later, but anyway, that's what it's called. Basically, it's kind of like my mantra in terms of my design. You know, you have to break things to make them good. You have to understand how to create something shit, or you have to make something good and then break it and then fix it again to kind of really understand what you're doing. And that's kind of my approach. Like, the beauty is in the imperfection. Anyway. So, I was born and grew up somewhere kind of near the bottom of the cat's mouth, near the cat food, somewhere around here. Then ended up kind of up here somewhere. Not by choice, but you know, that's the way things are. In a beautiful, idyllic town, which there's, if you want to look it up, there's a book. You can look at it called Shit Towns in Australia. It's full of beautiful landscapes, fascinating people. Anyway, so long story short, I actually never studied electronics, by the way, in case anyone's wondering. I actually studied architecture, and I worked as a draftsman for 4 years for an architect firm. But there was a guitar shop down the street which I always used to go because I was playing in bands and around here and breaking stuff and getting it fixed. So this was all like back in the days before they had colour photography. This is not actually the shop, it was actually underneath his house, and he was a luthier, and it was kind of just a cool hangout point. We used to go to his house, and he had underneath his house was just a full workshop in a tiny little space where he was selling these guitars. He would make second-hand guitars, second-hand pedals, and he was also trying to build his own stuff. So we got talking, and he gave me a big box of pedals to fix because I was interested one day. And then I took them home, and my dad showed me what all of the things were, because he's an electronics guy.
Whatever it's called.
He's he's electronics engineer. He worked for the Weather Bureau building radar connectors and satellites, and not satellites, he didn't build fucking satellites. He built the connections that collect the data from the satellites out in like remote areas and stuff. And that used to be my job on school holidays, was soldering together these cables, and then ended up kind of making my own business out of that. Worked on his side of things for a bit, building like data boxes for weather systems and things. And I kind of enjoyed it, so always growing up around solder and components and these little workshops and everything. And I was playing, so I wanted to kind of figure out how I could make the electronics knowledge into something that I enjoyed, which was playing music. So when I started talking with Tim, who was He owns 2 guitars. Asked him if he needed help one day, and he gave me a big box of pedals, so I took them home over the weekend, fixed them all up, brought them back, and they're all fixed, and he said, "Do you want a job?" And I said, "Yep, I've got one already, but I'll have to quit that." So the next day I quit my job, turned up to his, started my own business, and then ended up making pedals. So this is the modern version of what we made, which was the first one, which is called the Big Bottom. And that was the first thing of working with one of the big bands at the time called Magic Dirt. And the bassist had a huge collection of guitar pedals, but couldn't use them through bass because they would lose too much tone. So we basically built this box for him, which allowed all of the low end to come through, but he could dial in frequencies as a splitter, so he could run all these like vintage guitar effects without having too much loss of his signal, which worked out quite well. I couldn't find any pictures of the actual old ones anywhere, but this picture is what the effects used to look like, which was sandblasted enclosures on perf board, and it was an absolute mess, and they looked like piles of shit. But then later on we moved on to using proper boxes, but everything was completely done by hand, so everything was hand drilled, everything was screen printed by hand. Circuit boards were made using transfers and hand drilled and hand soldered, and it used to take quite a long time to make them. We used to make a clone of the Shitness fuzz, if anyone knows that. It's an old Japanese fuzz pedal, and we used to use a boost circuit in front of it, and it was impossible to get these transistors, so we used to go and buy old organs and strip them apart for this one particular transistor. So out of a whole organ we might end up with like 15 of these transistors, but they were incredible for this overdrive circuit before this fuzz. So I think we only ended up making about 50 of those. One of which who bought one was The Edge from U2 when he was touring in Brisbane. He sent his guitar tech to the shop. Normally it would be like a 3-week wait because they take about 4 days to make. But he wanted one, and he was flying out the next morning, and he was adamant that he wanted it for his collection. So I stayed up all night and didn't sleep and built it for him. Delivered it, and he came and picked it up and said, "Oh yeah, cool, thanks, see you later." But luckily for me, if he opens it up, he'll find that there's a massive cock drawn inside underneath. And one day he opens up and just sees this massive penis inside. Anyway, so moving on from that, I ended up fixing guitar amplifiers. There was a guy who was importing boutique amplifiers from around the world. One of those which was Meetup, so I started talking with them and becoming their service dealer in Australia. And their circuits the amplifiers were beautiful, but there was always something wrong when they came back. So I managed to fix what was wrong with them and improve them, and then got talking with the engineers, and we were talking quite a lot. And their main engineer, Dave Green, who was left and had gone to Ashdown. So they asked me if I was interested in coming over, so I said yes. So I got on a flight, turned up on their doorstep, and then that's where the Meetup story began. So these amplifiers for me were, the history of this company was very intriguing. I just really wanted to go and know what all of this was about. So Matt Mathias is up in the top. The reason why the name's called Meetup was because his name was Matt, and his mate was called Tony. So they came up with their design. So one of their first major amplifiers was the Series 2000, which is on the top left-hand corner. And these things were beautiful. Like they looked like they were incredibly engineered. They just looked like they were built by the hand of God. In the same way that Dave Reeves' highlights looked absolutely incredible. I mean, the engineering was phenomenal and the sound was beautiful. And so on the bottom was the Series 2000, which is the modern version, which we recreated for their 40th anniversary. The company started around in 48. It's one of the oldest companies actually, apart from Vox. They have a very, very long history. His story is absolutely incredible. It's worth looking into, putting up some links. So to build these by hand for me was a very, it was a privilege really to be able to be part of this. And this guy down the bottom, Peter Green, is where the story all started really, and how they became well known, how they became famous. And in the top right-hand corner is the predecessor. Well, it is actually the amplifier that spawned. Well, the Series 2000 sounded like this. It's not going to work very well. Anyway, fuck that, it's not working. So the top right-hand corner is basically the predecessor of what was known for a very well-known company, which I'm not going to get into, but... Okay, so this is Albatross by Peter Green, which was Flaming Mac, basically. This spawned all of this, which also spawned a company that you know, which looks like a pile of fruit. That's a completely different story, which I'm not going to go down that path, but if it wasn't for this guy, a lot of history would never have been made, so he needs his creative style. Anyway, so when I started in the company, my job was to kind of take off where Dave left. So the GT1 at the time was their 100-watt head, and it was their main kind of selling amplifier. There was some issues with it, so some things that needed to be sorted out with tone stacks, improvements made to the transformers and the power supply, but it was also the main amp that we used for modification. So that really got me into working with a lot of artists and customizing their amplifiers purely for them. And then on the right was my first real addition to their product lineup, which was the GT2, which was the twin channel of the GT1. Yeah, so that's that. Where do we go from there? Oh yeah, okay. So from then I moved on to into building bass amps. All of these pictures. Oh, actually, sorry. That's the first. This was the first custom head that I did, and it was based on the Series 2000. So when we were making the Series 2000, they were all a complete and utter recreation of what the original was, to the hand-bent chassis, to all of the brass screws that went into it. Everything was exactly the same as the original was. But we made them all, and we had some parts left over, and this guy really, really wanted one. But instead, he kind of wanted when he came to the workshop and started playing through some stuff, he really liked Dave's 1224, but he wanted the look of the original. So this was one of my first custom creations, really, which was all of the look of the original, but with a completely modern design. So I hand-delivered that to him personally, actually, in London. He had a massive wank over it. So anyway, I can't find any good pictures of this, but this is when I started doing my first 200-watt amplifiers, so getting into the bass territory now. And this was a highly modified version of, kind of based on an original, with completely different tone stacks and different switching options and proper DI outputs and stuff for a a guy who was touring at the time. I went through a lot of different iterations. There was a bass chat forum that went on for, I don't know, years. But all the pictures have been taken down now, so I couldn't actually show you any decent ones, and I've lost it all because that was, a century ago. And this was kind of me doing my first kind of show off of layouts and things. I mean, it doesn't look like much, but these are kind of all the pictures I could find, unfortunately. But it led basically to me redesigning the 200 watt amp and changing the tone stacks, completely changing the transformers, using hand-wound C-core transformers, and that was a beast. It was a great amp, and that was one of my funnest parts, really, the fact that I could actually just really put my stamp on something. And it led to a lot of different things. It led to a lot of touring with bands. It led to actually working with a company called Proel International, where I came up with some concepts for them to take over their Mark-based range, which I produced. And it didn't go anywhere in the end, unfortunately, because of politics. But that kind of got me into the kind of bigger world and the way that the whole thing works. So being sent over to Music Mass at the time, which was when it was good and relevant. With the pass to basically just go out and just scout around and see what people are doing and all of that kind of stuff within the limelight. So anyway, moving on from that. Meetup, I was there for 4 years. I was working on the side as well. I had my own workshop where I would do repairs locally and stuff that I couldn't do with the company. I would do outside of that. And that led to working with a guy in Huddersfield, basically building recreations of the originals valve sound systems from the 70s. So he had his brand, and I basically came up with the designs. He built the boxes and the speakers, and essentially that's kind of what came out of it, which was a fully custom 600 watt valve amplifier. Also from that I had a lot of repairs, which one of them, the most scariest repair I've ever done was this. You can't see inside of it, unfortunately, but that is a 1200 watt valve amp that's running 12 KT88 per side, so that's running 24 KT88, and it was scary as shit. Serious current. You'd switch it on and the lights would dim, and turning it on with a broomstick and hoping that it doesn't explode. That was an interesting and rebuild. It needed like 3 people to pick it up. It was like actually just like a trolley. You would just wheel it around.
What was it used for?
That was insane.
Submarine?
Well, it was just a loud amplifier. But made for driving like big 18, 21 inch bass speakers for sound systems. So that lasted for a little while, and then from that, actually there was a book written about the reggae sound system scene in Huddersfield. Actually, some of the stuff that I refurbished and built was in an exhibition. I think these are some of the pictures from it. I think this book, I never bought it. I should have, because it's got some really cool stuff in there. But anyway, so you can see my scribbles on all of these valves after testing them and stuff, and finding vintage golden lines in valves that are in stuff that are 4 years old that is just absolute gold dust. It was very interesting experience working with these guys. They're extremely passionate about what they do. So, anyway, from that, while I was actually at Matamp, I was in contact with a guy who had a company called Stone Deaf. And we did a couple of iterations with him for ideas of his products. He had a pedal at the time that was actually being used by this guy, unfortunately. Just joking. But yeah, that was his claim to fame. So basically, we went about designing an entire product range, which included pedals and amplifiers, and a full, complete rebrand. So the graphic artist, Macbeth, actually came up with all of these logo designs and things. He actually has a shop here in Berlin with the Dude's Factory. He's based in London. And luckily, he's just a guy who just loves gear. So instead of just charging £1,000 an hour, or whatever he charges, he just wanted a bunch of gear. So we got really lucky with this deal. And he did an incredible job. So we went about redesigning their amplifiers, and pedals, which was, the premise behind this was fully analog valve audio path, but with digital control signal. So basically, you could store up to 128 presets in this thing. So it was an extreme challenge, but also it allowed a lot of freedom in a sense, because you could build a standard single channel, twin channel amplifier, but have an infinite amount of expansion just by a touch of the button and with full MIDI control. So that was about 2 years of development in my bedroom. Actually had to move to a bigger bedroom, but then got kicked out by the council because I was running a business out of my bedroom. So then we decided that we needed a workshop. So we built a workshop. This is a soundproof room doing the testing. This is us looking like a bunch of nubbins in the fucking workshop. That's Tom Wilson, who deserves all the credit for the pedal amplifier designs. He's an absolute legend. He's now working for Digico in London, doing fancy stuff. And on the left is Keith and Luke, father and son who own business. So from there, hang on, I skipped a bunch of stuff. What happened to me? Well, I deleted some slides by accident. Anyway, this is just some production shots of what we did in our little hovel. It was a lovely hovel. Some of the pedal boards all going into production, the amplifiers going into production. Oh yeah, so this is where we launched it now. And that was pretty fucking cool. It was a long time of planning. It was a lot of money, but we were there off our own backs. We had a great product. A couple of them broke, but we fixed them on the kitchen table in the Airbnb and got things back on the road. We took our only prototypes all the way to California. We had no backups. We just had to hope that they just turned up and worked and arrived. And they did for the whole thing. It was great. And so we got to meet we got on the front cover of Premier Guitar magazine, actually. I mean, we hadn't even produced anything. So that was just from the prototype that they'd seen. So by the time we got back, there was a lot going on. There was a lot of buzz and a lot of hype, and it was really cool. So I got to meet some famous people. That's Paul Frank. He showed me his car collection, and it's fucking awesome. That's the guys from Reverb doing their reviews on the amp for the NAMM. And then that led to these guys. So I don't know. He's pretty old now, but maybe you can recognize him. He used to play in this band called Led Zeppelin, but he doesn't anymore. He's still alive. But anyway, on the left, the point is Liam Tyson. So he was the first endorser of the amplifiers. He used to play two high watts, twin high watts with a stereo rig set up, and it was like quite iconic. I mean, some of the footage from Glastonbury is just like absolutely incredible. They sound beautiful. So the fact that he even gave a shit and liked these in the first place to me was a huge thing. So he gave us a design. We did two custom variations of the 50 watt. Put them into a combo with he wanted a certain kind of style which we worked on. So I built those for him and sent them down to his studio in Bath for his tech to try out, to plug it into his system, because I hadn't actually seen his setup. I didn't actually know if it was going to work and plug in, but they plugged it all in, it worked seamlessly. And then the next day they packed it up and flew it to LA, and they played live with David Letterman, and they didn't blow up. So yeah, that was that, and that's kind of down to the end of the story. That all kind of went a bit tits up. Here's some, I think that's Letterman actually, where he was playing. I think it was with Cast at the time. Yeah, so I think he was. I mean, if anyone doesn't know him, I think he came from the Lars and then played in Cast, and now he's Robert Plant's guitarist for the Shapeshifters. So among other things, I mean, we sent some stuff to a recording studio in New York where Nick Valenci was recording at the time. He probably used it for one song and then sent it back. Who knows? But it kind of came to a bit of an abrupt end, and that's kind of like how I'm here. So I'm now here, and yeah, I'm working here with a tech startup, and yeah, kind of doing my own little thing on the side and seeing how things go. Yeah, exactly. But that's kind of it. That's my story.